These days in north central Washington, it feels like each year is hotter, drier, and smokier than ever before. Have been slowing and spreading water with their unique digging, damming, and tree felling behavior.
Pump station failures in dry country are usually blamed on rust, erosion, or landslides. But the scene in the Okanagan Valley in October 2026 defied every normal explanation. At the bottom of a private water facility, what had sealed the discharge valve was not inorganic debris. It was a web of branches marked with unmistakable beaver bite marks. That was a serious geographic anomaly. This animal had vanished from the region for more than half a century. It was almost impossible to believe that a group of wild animals had dragged themselves across 50 miles of desert just to slip into an underground culvert hidden from view. There was no direct proof yet, but the scene was exposing one disturbing question. If this was not a random ecological accident, then who was quietly borrowing the primal instinct of this animal to interfere with the flow of an entire valley? Early in the morning, on October 15, 2026, a red warning light began flashing across the central control panel of pumping station number 4. The facility sat deep inside the Okanagan Valley in Washington state, a region heavily affected by desertification. The station was owned by Apex Water Corp., the largest private irrigation water supplier in the area. The system detected a sudden pressure loss in the underground auxiliary discharge valve and triggered an emergency shutdown to prevent a rupture caused by water pressure surging backward through the line. In a dry environment where mechanical systems are forced to run non-stop under punishing conditions, engineers usually assume the failure begins with the machine. Mineral-heavy groundwater can corrode valve systems, or industrial filters can split apart after years of wear. When the Apex Water Corp maintenance crew arrived at the site, they brought welding equipment and spare steel piping. But when the pumps drained the standing water from the underground reservoir, what emerged from the mud did not look like a technical failure. They found a massive object completely sealing a discharge outlet roughly 6.5 feet wide. The obstruction was not inorganic waste carried in from nearby settlements. It was not rock and soil from a collapsing slope. It was a thick mass of mud and earth, tightly woven into an intricate network of interlocked branches. The material had fused together so firmly that engineers could not remove it with hand tools or human strength. They had to bring in a large excavator and lower industrial steel winch cables into the outlet to slowly pull sections of mud and timber back to the surface. The process took hours. As the gray mud dried under the sun, the true structure of the obstruction began to reveal itself. Maintenance workers realized that the core of the mass was made from hundreds of poplar branches. When they examined the newly extracted wood, one physical detail stood out immediately. Along the surface of the branches, the bark had been stripped away. More importantly, both ends of each branch carried sharp, even, wedge-shaped bite marks. These were not fractures caused by the pressure of the pump. They were not clean cuts from a human metal saw blade. The angle cuts were a biological signature. In nature, only one animal has the jaw structure and front incisors powerful enough to create marks like that: the beaver. The discovery froze the entire repair operation. The presence of beaver-marked branches jammed inside an underground discharge outlet created a serious anomaly in geographic distribution. When investigators checked the ecological archive, a report from the Washington State Wildlife Agency gave them one clear piece of information. Beavers had not been recorded within a 50-mile radius of this pumping station for more than half a century. Imagine that distance as 50 miles of highway, crossing dry hillsides, cracked ground, and gravelly terrain with almost no surface water. Beavers are aquatic animals. Underwater, they move with ease. But once they climb onto land, their heavy bodies and short legs make them extremely slow. For a wild population to move on its own across 50 miles of desertifying terrain, avoid predators, survive dehydration, and reach this exact area would be physiologically impossible. And there was another problem. Beavers instinctively build dams along open streams. Yet this mud and timber mass had been built deep underground, locked directly into an industrial discharge outlet owned by Apex. It was a piece of infrastructure hidden from view, one that even many local residents barely knew existed. The appearance of beavers in a place where they no longer lived, diving underground and building a dam inside a high-capacity pumping machine, raised questions beyond the ordinary laws of nature. Some other physical factor had intervened to bring those bite-marked branches all the way to the bottom of the pumping station. The absence of beavers in the Okanagan Valley was not simply a natural migration story. When investigators overlaid ecological records onto the region's groundwater maps from the past decade, the disappearance began to reveal a systematic pattern. Satellite scans measuring surface moisture showed an extremely precise overlap. The coordinates where local authorities had labeled beavers as nuisance animals and cleared them out matched almost perfectly with the areas where shallow water sources were weakening the fastest. Geographically, beaver populations are not just wood-cutting animals. Beaver dams act like giant plugs, holding water across an entire valley. Imagine pouring a bucket of water down a sloped asphalt road. The water runs off within seconds and dries under the heat. But if sponge-like barriers were placed along that slope, the flow would slow, and the water would be forced to seep gradually into the ground. Beaver dams are those natural sponges. They keep rainwater and melting snow on the surface long enough for the water to pass through layers of gravel and stone, slowly replenishing the shallow underground water pockets beneath the valley. When those biological plugs are removed, the surface flow has nothing physical to slow it down. Water runs straight away and disappears from the region. The consequence comes quickly. The land loses its stored moisture. The farmers' natural wells, which depend on shallow water veins, begin to fail season after season. The free water that once existed beneath their feet gradually vanishes almost completely. At the exact moment those natural wells began drying out across the valley, local economic records showed a dizzying shift in the agricultural structure. A new type of private irrigation water contract began appearing and spreading across farms throughout the valley. The name printed on all of those legal documents was Apex Water Corporation. Once free groundwater was gone, farmers had no choice but to sign contracts and buy water from the company's pipeline system just to keep their crops alive. Leaked internal financial reports revealed a brutal truth about the pricing of a natural resource. Over the decade after the beaver populations were cleared out, the cost of those water contracts kept rising to several times their original level. Water, once a natural resource already present in the valley, had been compressed into an exclusive commodity with expensive monthly fees that every farm had to pay. They were paying out of pocket to buy back the same water that should have naturally soaked into their own land if the ecosystem had not been directly altered by human hands. The investigation then moved into independent audit records and uncovered murky financial flows. A massive budget had been spent systematically on lobbying. The goal of that money was to preserve state-level regulations that allowed unlimited hunting and killing of beavers under the banner of protecting agricultural infrastructure. On administrative paper, it was simply a legal wildlife control campaign against nuisance animals. But when projected onto the real hydrological map, it looked like a campaign to completely erase the natural water storage function of a vast landscape. Every beaver colony removed was like another free water storage station, destroyed without mercy. Once nature was stripped of its ability to hold water, a system of total dependency spread across the valley. So, if this land had been deliberately pushed into dryness and thirst, who truly designed this artificial drought for enormous profit? And what role did the mud and timber mass, marked with beaver teeth and jammed inside Apex Water Corp's underground discharge valve, play in that larger board of interests? The real clue explaining the appearance of the beavers was not on the surface. It was buried deep in the mud at the discharge outlet itself. After the wooden mass had been lifted out, professional divers continued scanning the bottom of the underground reservoir. At the edge of the metal discharge valve, they found a foreign object that did not belong to the biological structure of a beaver dam, and did not appear anywhere in the engineering blueprints for pumping station number 4. It was a small metal box, already rusting from long exposure to water, wedged tightly into the mechanical gaps. At first, investigators considered the possibility that someone had deliberately driven the beavers down into the underground culvert system. But the field examination quickly rejected that theory. There were no abandoned metal cages, Around the valve area, there were no traces of food bait, wildlife attracting chemicals, or scratches suggesting physical force by human handlers. This wild population had swum down there on its own, with complete willingness. When the metal box was brought to shore and opened in the lab, its internal structure looked nothing like a weapon designed to damage industrial infrastructure. There were no explosives, no computer malware to interfere with the control panel, no radar jamming transmitter. The device contained only a very basic circuit board, wired directly to a sound-emitting speaker membrane. The entire component cluster had been carefully sealed inside a specialized waterproof compound. Even though the microchip memory card had partially shorted under pressure, technicians still managed to extract and restore a single audio file set to repeat endlessly. The recovered audio was not a complex ultrasonic frequency or a radio command. When played back inside a soundproof room, it was only the monotonous trickle of water leaking through a narrow crack. To the human ear, it was harmless noise, so faint it could easily disappear beneath the roar of high-capacity pump engines. The investigation team was completely confused. They could not understand why a device planted inside an underground system for sabotage would only play the sound of a leaking faucet. But when the audio file was sent to a wildlife behavior research department, the answer from a biologist exposed the operating mechanism behind the entire event. In the nervous system of a beaver, the sound of trickling water is not ordinary background noise. This leaking frequency is a powerful trigger for primal instinct. It works like a survival command buried deep inside the animal's genetic code. When beavers hear water leaking through a narrow gap, they are driven to keep packing mud, hauling branches, and pressing material onto the exact place where the sound comes from. They will work like frantic machines trying to seal the invisible flow until the noise disappears completely. The rusted device was the point where mechanics and biology met. Whoever stood behind this did not need explosives. They did not need to send a sabotage team into the facility to break the discharge pipes. They only needed an underwater speaker, playing a frequency low enough for humans to ignore, but strong enough to force the beaver's instinct into obedience. This acoustic trap turned a wild animal into an extremely precise tool of sabotage. But who understood both the hidden structure of underground infrastructure and the instincts of wild animals well enough to set a perfect trap that left no physical trace? The abnormalities in the investigation record did not end with the underwater speaker. When attention rose from the mud to the surface, the way the system responded to the incident revealed strange gaps. According to standard procedure for a large-scale water facility, when an auxiliary discharge valve reports a pressure failure, the operating company must immediately send heavy equipment to clear the flow. But Apex Water Corp's server operation logs showed a systematic delay. Emergency response decisions were held back for hours instead of being carried out immediately. An internal bandwidth data review from pumping station number 4 exposed another mechanical irregularity. The system logs showed that 3 neighboring discharge valves on the same underground pipeline axis suddenly shifted into a sealed shut state. This valve locking action happened at the exact time pressure at the main discharge valve began to rise because of the mud and timber blockage. No automatic error warning was recorded for those 3 auxiliary valves. Closing them was a control action triggered directly from the center. Locking the backup exits while the main outlet was blocked created a perfect physical bottleneck underground. The physical consequence unfolded with destructive speed. A massive volume of water that should have escaped through the overflow system was trapped entirely behind the artificial Beaver Dam. The accumulating water rose beyond the safe control threshold of the underground retaining structure. Within a short time, water pressure tore through surface covers and surged back up onto the ground. A muddy flow spilled across a low-paved road running parallel to the pumping station. The water rose fast enough to knock down traffic posts and completely cut off the main travel route. A group of local residents living nearby were forced to activate an emergency evacuation order in the middle of the night to avoid being swept away. The most suspicious detail appeared before the water even had time to recede. Only hours after the evacuation, while rescue crews were still using sandbags to block the flow, a string of local newspapers and radio stations began running headlines about the event. Their reports did not focus on the evacuation or the operating responsibility of the pumping station. They all used the same phrase, identical down to the punctuation. Beaver dams pose a serious threat to water infrastructure security. The speed and absolute uniformity of that message turned a flood incident into a wide-reaching media campaign built to spread fear. Not one news outlet asked why the beavers were at the discharge outlet in the first place. They focused only on the damage the animals had caused to the water system. The spread of this message clearly served the business interests of the company that owned the pipeline network. Public fear over the nighttime flood was being used as a powerful legal lever. It appeared at the exact moment environmental activists were urging the state government to pass a bill restoring natural beaver populations in the Okanagan Valley. Was the water spilling onto the road truly the result of poor operations? Or was it the perfect stage piece needed to legitimize a permanent extermination order against the animal threatening the corporation's exclusive money-making machine? While local media and regulators trained every camera on the mud-covered asphalt road, a far larger physical phenomenon was quietly unfolding, where no human eye could see it. Public attention was completely pulled toward sensational reports about temporary damage to transportation infrastructure, allowing an extremely unusual thermal signal from deep within the geological layers of the Okanagan Valley to go unnoticed. The truth behind the entire collapse of the pump station was not on the surface. Exactly 1 week after the incident at the underground discharge valve, the Regional Geological Monitoring System collected wide-area infrared satellite imagery. The results showed dark red bands indicating high moisture density appearing around the pumping station. What made this striking was that the entire desertified region had not recorded a single rainfall event for weeks. This enormous amount of moisture was not concentrated at the flooded highway. Instead, it spread outward in underground rings, slowly drifting and covering the surface of farm clusters in the lower parts of the valley. Only a few days after the satellite detected the thermal signal, farms several miles from pumping station, Number 4 began reporting the same anomaly. Shallow wells scattered across the valley. Wells that had been dead dry for more than a decade, with mud at the bottom cracked into hard plates, suddenly began producing water again. Imagine natural groundwater veins as the biological capillary system inside the human body. When industrial pumping systems drain them, they collapse and shrink into hollow channels. But now, those capillaries between fractured rock and porous gravel were slowly swelling again, carrying cool water back up through the farmers' hand pumps. Hydrologists did not treat the recovery as a miracle. It was the result of a basic physical law: infiltration. When the Beaver's mud and timber mass sealed the discharge valve, an enormous volume of water was forced to stop and remain on the surface long enough to matter. That water was not pulled straight into Apex Water Corp's high-pressure steel pipelines. Gravity forced the still water to slowly seep through fractures in bedrock, move through porous gravel, and pass across thick layers of clay. This process directly recharged a massive amount of water into the shallow aquifer, the same aquifer that had been drained for 10 years by exclusive pipeline systems. This hydrological evidence completely reversed the true motive of whoever had placed the sound device at the bottom of the underground reservoir. The final purpose of that invisible hand was not to steal a massive quantity of water and sell it somewhere else. It was not to create a flood that damaged the road. The unknown actor had only borrowed the primal instinct of a wild animal to complete one physical task: force the water to stand still. By holding the flow on the surface long enough, they created a small window of time for the water to shed control and escape Apex's expensive exclusive toll system. For the first time after 10 long years of artificial drought, this priceless resource did not flow into the steel pipes of those who sold water. It quietly slipped back along the old underground path of nature. The intervention by sound had returned freedom to the surface flow, forcing life itself back into the Mother Earth. If one primal instinct, triggered by sound, could quietly rewrite the entire underground water map in just a few short days, do reinforced human systems truly offer absolute control over natural resources? Or is that control only a fragile manipulation, waiting for the day it collapses?